Good evening, one and all, and good evening to Sir. Happy Deepavali to all of you. Uh, I can hear the sound of crackers, and I hope that those who have joined today on this talk on Plato's, concept of justice, they will also, bring some question at the end, and maybe our discussion we will feel, or in other words, I will say that let's celebrate Deepavali with the understanding of, Plato's concept of justice. And let's compare the modern day justice system with Platonic justice system. Right. So far, we have discussed human nature, then the state, then communism, education, and maybe this is the last class on Plato's political thought. I mean, the last class will be the concluding class. Maybe this is the just before that last class on justice. Maybe next class I will conclude Plato's political thought, and today he will discuss on the concept of justice, how to create a just state or just society, right? I think so far, if you review all these, discussion on Plato's political thought, I think if you are intelligent, then you will perhaps get a sense of what is that Plato wants to say on his concept of, justice. Justice is nothing but creating a, just society or just state. All these classes, men of reason, men of spirit, men of appetite, if they will perform their respective function, then it will bring order and peace in the society. And that is the just, state or just society. Now, this is a very, primordial understanding of, Platonic, justice system. Now let's listen to Professor Guru to broaden our understanding on Platonic justice system, and I'm sure that he will bring some nuances to this understanding, of justice, given by Plato. So with this, I'm welcoming to Professor Guru, and I request him to start his deliberation on this topic. Yes, sir. Now you can continue.
Yes, my dear students, I welcome all of you to my class, and I wish we shall have meaningful academic discussions and interactions for the next 1 hour. While I say we shall have a meaningful academic discussions and interactions, I mean that you must be attentive in listening to the discussions and deliberations. Meaningful discussions and interactions can proceed provided you are attentive in listening to the discussions on Plato's concepts, understanding the logic inherent in Plato's concept as well. This is a prerequisite. That is why I insist in every class and urge upon you to be attentive in listening to the deliberations and discussions. Unless you understand what Plato says, what is the logic inherent in his concepts, your doubts can never be clarified. And the questions that you may ask in the end may digress from the essence of Plato's concepts and will constitute merely your observations or your judgments on Plato. So far as today's discussions is concerned, as you are already informed, I shall discuss with you on Plato's concept of justice. In the process, my discussions on these concepts, I would like to draw your attention to three important aspects. Why of this concept? What of this concept? And the implications or consequences of this concept so far as the state and the people of the state are concerned. These are the three major aspects or dimensions toward which I would like to draw your attention attentively for the purpose of clarity of understanding as regard Plato's concept or theory of justice is concerned. Yes. Why? Plato felt impelled or induced to conceptualize a new theory of justice, a new concept of justice. Why he rejected the theory of justice then prevailed and propagated during his time, not merely in the city-state of Athens, but also in almost all Greek city-states. Why? What is the reason? Plato observed during his lifetime absence of justice in his city-state of Athens as well as in other Greek city-states. He observed prevalence of injustice and he traced it to a false conception or false theories of justice then propagated and preached by the then teachers in different schools of thought in Greek city-states, including the city-state of Athens. And those teachers, those traditional teachers, were called then as the sophists. So sophistic teachings, theories of justice were propagated during his time. And these sophistic theories of justice were considered by Plato as a false theory of justice. False theory of justice in place of the true theory. False theory of justice which sophistic teachings contrived to spread. And the consequence was prevalence of social discord and disharmony, emergence of selfishness, political selfishness, corruption. So wrong messages were communicated in the name of the theories of justice by the sophistic teachers. This is the reason why Plato felt impelled to conceptualize and present a new theory of justice. And his hatred, his abhorrence, his disfavor toward the sophistic theory of justice was manifested. And he was convinced that the sophistic theories of justice were false theories of justice. While his master Socrates, whom he considered to be the greatest man of knowledge and wisdom born on this earth, was put to death by the then government of the city-state of Athens. So Plato felt induced. He disliked the then prevalent sophistic theories of justice and he formulated, he conceptualized a new theory of justice which would enable the people of the state to realize or attain the ultimate end of human life. The ultimate end of human life is a life of virtue, an objectively good life. Objective goodness, which is eternal, which is universal, which is unchangeable, which is perpetual, which is valid for all time and clime, which is valid for all human beings on this earth. That objective goodness, what is the essence of a life of virtue, according to Plato, may be attained or realized if new theory of justice, what he formulated, may be implemented and practiced in the states and especially in his city-state of Athens, so that social peace and harmony will be established, social accord would be established, there would be rule of knowledge and wisdom, political selfishness, competition, comparison will be removed. There will be peace and order in society. There will be fraternity and brotherhood among the people in society. Social stability, viability, peace, progress, and development may be obtained. This is the reason why a new concept of justice is formulated or conceptualized and presented by Plato to mankind. The objective is attainment of a life of virtue. So in Plato's conceptualization, justice is identical with virtue. This is the meaning of justice. Justice is a life of virtue, it is identical with a life of virtue. There is no difference between justice and virtue. Justice is eternal, virtue is eternal. So both these two terms, justice and virtue, are identical in Plato's conceptualization. So in Plato's conceptualization, justice is essentially a moral concept. It is not at all, it is never a legal concept. Today, by justice, we mean obedience to a legal framework, compliance with a legal framework, implementation of a legal framework. But that is not the concept of Plato. Whereas, during his time, the sophistic teachers were propagating theories of justice specifically in relation to obedience to legal framework. Sophistic theories of justice were legal theories of justice. But Plato's theory of justice that he conceptualized and presented is essentially and exclusively a moral framework, because the aim of justice is attainment of a life of virtue. Justice is equivalent to virtue. In explaining his concept of justice, in moral perspective, in moral term, Plato prefaces or prefixes his new concept of justice with a dialogue which is designed through imagination, a dialogue in which imaginary participants participated to discuss on a true concept of justice. And the convener of that imaginary dialogue was also an or is also an imaginary person named Socrates. Plato names the convener as Socrates, quite in reverence to his master Socrates. Socrates was not living then, he was dead already. But to pay respect to his master Socrates, he, in the dialogue that he formulated or framed, made him the convener for a group discussions on a true concept of justice. And in that discussions, there were a number of participants who represented different schools of thought on justice, the sophistic schools of thought on justice. So discussions took place in between Socrates, the imaginary figure on one hand, who represented Plato's conceptualizations. And on the other hand, there were other participants in the group discussions who represented different theories of justice as preached and propagated by sophistic teachers. And in that group discussion, in that dialogue, the first sophistic theories of justice which was presented was the traditional theory of justice. And the chief spokesman of the traditional theory of justice are Cephalus and Polemarchus. These are two imaginary figures again. They represented the traditional theory of justice, which the sophistic teachings contrived to spread in Athens and other city states. And what is the central theme of this traditional theory of justice? According to Cephalus and Polemarchus, justice is giving to each man what is due to him. So the possessions of an individual must be maintained intact. No individual should be deprived of his possessions. If he is deprived, he must be returned back his possessions or he must be duly compensated. This is the central theme of the traditional theory of justice, giving to each man what is due to him. But Socrates, the convener of that dialogue, rejects this traditional theory of justice. He points out that giving to each man what is due to him is exclusively a behavioral aspect. And justice is not behavioral. Justice is not at all external. There is something deeper or inherent meaning so far as justice, true concept of justice is concerned. And the discussions was taken up by another group of sophists or sophistic teachers who presented the radical theory of justice. And the chief spokesman of this radical theory of justice was Thrasymachus. And the central theme of this radical theory of justice is might is right. Might is right. That means one who is stronger or strongest in the society, whatever he says, whatever rules or regulations he makes, must be complied with. And compliance to the laws, rules, regulations, orders, and commands made by the strongest individual in society is a justice, what he says. And therefore, he says that injustice is better than justice. To render obedience to the orders and commands or decisions of the strongest individual will certainly harm the interest of others. And certainly, Thrasymachus is not in favor of justice. And he says that injustice is better than justice. If you do not obey what he says, what the strongest individual says or orders, your good lies there. And therefore, injustice is better than justice, he says. And the basic assumption is might is right. But Socrates again rejects this radical theory of justice as presented by Thrasymachus. And he says it is not might is right. It is right which is might. Justice is rightness. Justice is objective goodness. That is perpetual, permanent. That is unchangeable. And therefore it is the mightiest phenomenon in society. So justice is right. And that right is might, he says. The discussions was again taken up by another group of sophistic teachers who presented the pragmatic theory of justice. And the chief spokesman of this pragmatic theory of justice was Glucan and Adimantus. These were the spokesmen. And what they said? They said that justice is pragmatic in the sense that justice is the product of the social contract. Obedience to the terms and conditions of the social contract made for the establishment of the society and the state is justice, they assert. According to them, society and state have been formed through a social contract. And the social contract lays down terms and conditions for a cooperative human existence. So if you obey the terms and conditions, you are just. Disobedience to the disobedience to the terms and conditions of the social contract or the convention or the covenant through which the state has been established would culminate in prevalence of injustice. Therefore, the argument of Glucan and Edmentus was justice is essentially a legal aspect. It connotes legalism, it is characterized by legalism, obedience to laws, rules, regulations made in accordance with the provisions of the covenant or the social contract results in establishment of justice. It is behavioral, therefore. And Socrates rejects this pragmatic theory of justice as preached and propagated by the sophistic teachers such as Glucan and Adimantus. So these three major schools of thought, the traditional school of thought, the radical school of thought, the pragmatic school of thought, these three major schools of thought and their concomitant theories of justice which prevailed during the time of Plato, which contrived to spread a false conception of justice, presented that justice is external, behavioral, in the sense that obedience to rules, regulations, laws would culminate in the establishment of justice. That concept was totally rejected by Socrates, the imaginary figure whom Plato named as the convener of the group discussions, the dialogue. It is through the mouth of Socrates, that imaginary figure, that Plato enunciates his own concept of justice, a new concept of justice, what he considers as the true concept of justice, and which he intends to be implemented in society in place of the false concept of justice, which the sophistic teachers had contrived to spread in Athens, resulting in social disharmony, emergence of political selfishness, social disintegration, discord, loss of fraternity, loss of peace and stability. Therefore, through the mouth of Socrates, that imaginary figure in that dialogue, Plato presents us a new theory of justice. And he says that justice is never external, justice is never behavioral. Justice is not obedience to merely obedience to laws, rules, or regulations made by the authority of the state. But justice is internal. Justice is psychic. Justice is moral. Justice resides in the soul of the individual and gets manifested in the individual's behavior. This is the essence of justice that Plato, through the mouth of that imaginary figure Socrates, tells to mankind. And he explains his new concept of justice. And he says that justice is a right condition of virtues of the state. As the students of political science interested in understanding political thought, and especially the thought of Plato, you must remember and understand this famous statement of Plato on justice. Justice is the right condition of virtues of the state, he says. If in any interview a question is asked to you because you are a student of political science, what is Plato's concept of justice? And you are required to answer it in a single sentence. What would be your answer? Remember it. According to Plato, justice is a right condition of virtues of the state. Try to understand the meaning of these terms used in this statement and their implications as well. Because the entire theory of the new theory of justice or Plato's theory of justice is epitomized in this single sentence or statement. Justice is the right condition of virtues of the state. The virtues of the state must be kept in right condition. What are the virtues of the state? And how the virtues of the state would be kept in right condition or maintained in right condition? That is the moot point to be understood and analyzed. And according to Plato, the virtues of the state are identified in three major types. The first one is the virtue of wisdom. Second one is the virtue of courage. And third one is the virtue of temperance. These are the three virtues of the state as identified by Plato. Here we are discussing Plato's assumptions. Mind it again. You must remember it. We are discussing Plato's concept, his beliefs, his assumptions, his postulations. And what he says? That there are three major virtues of the state: virtue of wisdom, virtue of courage, and virtue of temperance. Only when these virtues are kept in right condition, then only he believes that justice should prevail and be established in the state. Then only the people of the state would be enabled to attain or realize the ultimate objective of human life, that is, a life of virtue. Otherwise, a life of virtue, according to him, can never be attained if the virtues of the state would not be kept in right condition. This is the prerequisite. This is the essential condition. What are these three virtues? Virtue of wisdom. These are the virtues of the state. Again, I am repeating. Virtue of wisdom is also a very important virtue of the state, he says. Rather, it is the topmost virtue of the state. Similarly, virtue of courage is another important virtue of the state, and virtue of temperance is the third important virtue of the state. And these virtues of the state pertain to the different classes of population which composed together constitute the state in Plato's conceptualization. For understanding these virtues of the state, wisdom, courage, and temperance, we must therefore understand the composition of social composition of Platonic ideal state or the republic. In Plato's conceptualization, as we have repeatedly discussed earlier, the state is composed of three classes of people: the ruling class, the military class, and the producing class. The ruling class is composed of a men of reason in the sense that those individuals in whom the element of reason is found to be predominant compared to the other two elements will be made by nature or intended by nature, destined by nature to become members of the ruling class. So ruling class is composed of men of reason. Ruling class therefore represents the element of reason. At the same time, the military class is composed of a man of spirit. Those individuals to whom the element of spirit is found predominant compared to the other two elements. And the producing class is composed of a man of appetite. Those individuals in whom the element of appetite is predominant compared to the other two elements. This concept of human nature of Plato, as well as the composition of the population of Plato's ideal state, the class composition of Plato's ideal state must be kept in mind, therefore, for understanding the virtues of the state. Virtue of wisdom, according to him, is the virtue of the ruling class, which is composed of a men of reason. And this ruling class, while performing its function, natural function of ruling and governing, must display the virtue of wisdom, therefore. So, members of the ruling class are required by Plato not only to think but also to act quite in conformity with the element of reason which is predominant in them compared to the other two elements. They must therefore display the virtue of wisdom. They must think rationally, must devote themselves to rational contemplation, must engage themselves in finding out the ingredients of a life of virtue to be attained by the people of the society as a whole. And therefore, they are required to become selfless to the utmost extent, he says, because reason issues forth in selflessness. So the members of the ruling class must be free from corruption, must be free from emotions, must keep the element of spirit and appetite which is also present in them, must suppress them, must control them, must only display the quality of reason in their thinking and activities. They are to engage themselves in deciding public policies through rational contemplation for attainment of a life of virtue for all, and that too they must work selflessly, non emotively, without any emotions. That is the reason why we have already discussed earlier that the members of the ruling class, including the philosopher king, would be deprived of property and family because these two institutions are repetitive institutions. They tend to tarnish the element of reason which they represent. They tend to overshadow the element of reason with their evil implications and distract the members of the ruling class from discharging their functions quite in conformity with the qualities of the element of reason which is predominant in them. We have already discussed it. So the members of the ruling class are expected by Plato to display the virtue of wisdom. They must be selfless. They must be non emotive. They must be free from corruption. They must be good for all time to come. They must not be distracted by the influences of the element of spirit or the element of appetite which is present in them. But they must concentrate on the governing function. They must devote themselves to rational contemplation. Find out the ingredients of life of virtue. Make public policies accordingly and contribute their best, specialize in this function and contribute their best for the attainment of a life of virtue for all. Similarly, he says that the members of the military class must display the virtue of courage. Virtue of courage is the virtue of the military class, the men of spirit, the soldiers. So, members of the military class in whom the element of spirit is predominant are therefore expected by Plato or required by Plato to devote themselves in their thinking and activities toward for being engaged in the military function. They must have patriotism, nationalism, must work selflessly. They must carry out the orders and commands of the philosopher king and members of the ruling class. And they must contribute their best for establishing a situation of peace and order within the state and protecting the state from foreign attack or invasion. Therefore, Plato says that the element, the virtue of courage is specifically the virtue of the ruling, the military class, he says. They must display the virtue of courage, chivalry, patriotism in discharging their military function. which is the natural function to be performed by them because of the predominance of the element of spirit in them compared to the other two elements. Therefore, the members of the military class are also not expected by Plato to be distracted by the governing function or the producing function. They must concentrate and confine themselves to the discharge of the military function only and exclusively, without having any temptation or emotions to be engaged in the ruling function or the producing function. This is the virtue of courage. And the third virtue of the state is the virtue of temperance. And this virtue of temperance is not the specific virtue of the third class, that is the producing class. Plato says this is the virtue of all the three classes of people of the state. All the three classes of people. This is the virtue of the ruling class, the military class, as well as the producing class. So far as the producing class is concerned, Plato says that the producing class is composed of a man of appetite, those individuals in whom the element of appetite is predominant compared to the other two elements, the reason and spirit. So members of the producing class are required by Plato to devote themselves exclusively to the producing function, not to think of or to be lured or tempted to perform the governing function or the military function. No, he says. Members of the producing class must engage themselves to the function of producing goods and commodities, crops and grains of various kinds and types as necessary for the physical maintenance, sustenance, nourishment of this physical body of all members of the state. And they are to carry out their functions under the supreme direction of the philosopher king. The philosopher king is to decide what to produce, where to produce, how to produce. Members of the military class, members of the producing class would merely render their labor, engage themselves actually in the producing function. But they must not be restricted or lured or tempted to participate in the governing function or the military function. They have only one function, that is the producing function, in which they must specialize in accordance with the directions of the philosopher king. And they must discharge these functions for the benefit of all members of the society. So the members of the producing class must exercise utmost temperance or self-control in performing the producing function. Members of the military class must exercise utmost control in performing the military function. Members of the ruling class must exercise utmost temperance or self-control in performing the governing function. One class must not be lured or tempted to perform the function of another class. Therefore, in Plato's ideal state or his republic, there is no occupational mobility. Some students had asked it last class. There is no occupational mobility. If you belong to a particular class as decided by nature or intended by nature, you must be a member of that particular class throughout your life. You cannot change your function. A member of the producing class can never become a soldier or a ruler. Member of a military class can never become a producer or a ruler. Member of the ruling class can never become a soldier or a producer. Occupation is fixed. Occupation is determined, intended by nature throughout life. There is no occupational mobility. There is no class mobility. Rather, Plato's republic or ideal state is characterized by class rigidity. It is fixed for all time to come. No one can change the occupations. No one can be distracted by the functions of another class. You must specialize in your own function. You must mind your own function. You must contribute your best to the society for attainment of life of virtue for all. Then only he says there would be right condition of virtues in the state. The virtues of the state, in the sense that the virtue of wisdom, courage, and temperance must be kept in right condition, in proper condition. There must not be interference or interchangeability of functions by the classes. Rather, there must be specialization of functions by every class of Platonic state. This is what he says. And then only the virtues of the state would be kept in right condition. So Plato understands, he gives a new theory of justice. This is essentially a moral concept because it is concerned with attainment of a life of virtue. Justice is identical with virtue. And he says that their justice would prevail provided the virtues of the state are kept in right condition. And what is that right condition? The three classes of people must be mindful and of their own natural functions, must specialize in the natural functions, must not interfere in the functions of one another, and exercise utmost self-control or temperance in the discharge of functions and contribute their best for the attainment of a life of virtue for all. Then only virtues of the state, wisdom, courage, and temperance would be kept in right condition, and justice would prevail in the state. So far as this concept of Plato, that justice should be kept in right condition, and then only there would be prevalence of justice or establishment of justice. So far as this concept is concerned, right condition of virtues of the state, what he calls as justice, can be obtained or attained provided the individual or every single individual of his ideal state is just, or there is justice at the level of the individual. Because every class of Platonic ideal state is composed of individuals. Ruling class is composed of individuals, men of reason. Military class is composed of individuals, men of spirit. Producing class is composed of men of appetite. So every class is composed of individuals, no doubt, with the predominant, the class represents a predominant element, but it is composed of individuals. So unless the individual is just, or unless there is a justice at the level of the individual, how can there would be obtained justice at the level of the state? It is not possible, because individual is the basic element of the state. Therefore Plato says that the individual must become just so as to facilitate establishment or prevalence of justice at the level of the state. Then only the virtues of the state can be right, can be kept in right condition. So Plato emphasizes, or Plato requires, that every individual must be just. There must be justice at the level of the individual, he says. And what is justice at the level of the individual? This is the individual aspect of Plato's concept of justice. This is the foundational concept, therefore. The foundational concept of the state, as you have already discussed, human nature. What he says, justice at the level of the individual can be established provided there would be right condition of three elements of individual soul. Therefore, you must understand Plato's concept of human nature, and that is why I have repeatedly told you in almost all my discussions. The concept of human nature is the foundational concept of Plato's political thought. Human nature is composed of three elements: reason, spirit, and appetite. And these three elements are the gifts of nature. Nature has implanted these three elements in the soul of the individual, not equally, but in different proportions. In the soul of one individual, element of reason may be predominant compared to the other two elements. In the soul of another individual, element of spirit may be predominant compared to the other two elements. In the soul of another individual, appetite may be predominant compared to the other two elements. So nature has not made individuals equally, not has gifted the three elements equally in their souls. Rather, nature has distributed the three elements in individual soul differently from individual to individual. So he notices the feature of natural inequality among the individuals so far as the composition of their soul is concerned. The pattern of distribution of the three elements in the soul of the individual is concerned. And what he says, justice at the individual, at the level of the individual, requires prevalence of the right condition of the three elements in human soul. All these three elements must be kept in right condition, in proper condition, in the sense that if element of reason is predominant compared to the other two elements, he must think and behave quite in conformity with the quality of reason. If spirit is predominant in him, he must think and behave in conformity with the quality of spirit. If appetite is predominant, he must think and behave in conformity with the quality of appetite. Therefore, what he requires, these three elements in the individual soul may be kept in right condition, provided there is harmony among the three elements, cooperation among the three elements. These three elements must not conflict with one another, must not distract the individual in the discharge of his natural function as determined on the basis of the predominant element of his soul. This is the requirement. Then only there will be right condition of the three natural elements of individual soul. And he says the individual is a just individual. If element of reason is predominant in him and it tempts to perform and think in conformity with the quality of spirit or the quality of appetite, he is not just. He commits injustice. That is what he says. If element of spirit is predominant in him, but he thinks and tends to think and war in conformity with the quality of reason or appetite, he is unjust. If appetite is predominant in him, but he thinks he is tempted by the quality of reason or spirit, he is unjust. So he must exercise utmost self-control so far as the natural composition of the three elements of his soul is concerned. He must display only that quality in thinking and behavior in conformity with the predominant element, and must specialize in that quality of that predominant element. So there must not be interference, intermeddling of the three elements present in his soul. Every element must be kept in its proper place, in its right condition. There must be cooperation, there must be coexistence, there must be harmony. So there must be harmonious relationship among the three elements. They must not conflict with one another and distract the individuals in different directions in the discharge of his natural function. See here, what a difficult thing he says and proposes. The individual is required to exercise utmost self-control, therefore. Always speaks of self-control, always speaks of specialization of functions, quite in conformity with the predominant element. This is human nature, and then only there will be justice, he says. This is required by nature, he says. This is intended by nature, he says. So in Plato's conceptualization, only when the individual becomes a just individual, or there prevails justice at the level of the individual, in the sense of harmonious coexistence of the three elements in his soul, then only the state can display the three virtues: virtue of wisdom, courage, and temperance. And these three virtues of the state can be kept in right condition, and there would be justice in the state. Therefore, this theory of justice or concept of justice of Plato essentially reveals two major aspects. One is the social aspect or state aspect of justice, which requires maintenance of right condition of virtues of the state, and also the foundational concept, what he considers as the concept of justice at the level of the individual, which requires that the three elements of individual soul must be kept in right condition. So this theory of justice as a whole, if we glance at this theory of justice of Plato, what do we notice? Plato's theory of justice is therefore essentially characterized by two major principles. The first one is the principle of functional specialization, and the second one is the principle of non-interference. So every individual must specialize in the function as determined by the predominant element of his soul. Every class must perform or specialize in the function as determined by the element which the class represents. This is the principle of functional specialization. And the second one is the principle of non-interference. The elements of individual soul must not interfere with one another, but must allow and encourage the predominant element and induce the individual, motivate the individual to think and act in conformity with that predominant element. There must be practiced non-interference so far as the presence of the distribution of these three elements in the soul is concerned. And similarly, the three classes of population must not interfere in the functions of one another. On one hand, every class it is required to specialize in its natural function. At the same time, every individual is required to specialize its natural function. And at the same time, every individual is required not to interfere in the functional configuration of his soul. And at the same time, he says that every class must not interfere in the functions of other. These are the two principles, the principle of functional specialization and the principle of non-interference, which characterize essentially Plato's theory of justice or concept of justice. And Plato believes that only when there is justice at the level of the individual, then only there would be justice at the level of the state, in the sense of maintenance of right condition of virtues of the state. Then only the state and its people would be enabled to attain or realize the ultimate objective or goal of mankind, that is a life of virtue for all. So a virtuous life, a life of virtue, in the sense that a life which is characterized by eternal goodness, universal goodness, can be obtained provided justice is established in the state. Justice is established at the level of the individual as well. This is the requirement. Therefore, Plato's ideal state, his republic, is also termed as a treatise on justice. Justice is, therefore, natural goodness of human life. It is not obedience to the laws made by the state merely. It never connotes a legal meaning. It has no legal connotation. It is a moral connotation because it is essentially concerned with attainment of a life of virtue. And Plato tells us his assumptions, I'm again repeating it, his assumption, his concepts, which we may agree, which we may disagree or reject. But what he says, it influences us. It has impact on us, on our thinking, so that we can think of a life of virtue and design our socio-political existence accordingly, for attainment of a good human life for all time to come. That's all, so far as his concept of justice is concerned, very briefly.
So
I
thank
now,
you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Uh, I think we need to think whether is there any relevance of Platonic justice today. That is the question we need to ask. And the way Plato defined justice as something internal, not external. There is no judiciary. It is all about the philosopher king, and it is all about men of reason, spirit, and appetite. They are working in their own sphere without any interference. It is all about functional specialization and principles of interference. These are the two uh, mechanism uh, mechanism of Platonic, justice. And today, the question what we need to ask is that: are we specialized? Are we really within our own boundary? Are we intervening in each other's work? And most importantly, are we virtuous? That is the most important question. It is a question that needs to be asked to the individual. Is individual virtuous? Is society virtuous? Is state virtuous? And if not, then who will give justice and what kind of justice would be
yes,
given to us? Is it not justice to one becomes injustice to other? But certainly, justice demands that there must not be any injustice. If you see our legal system, then people say that justice to one is equal to injustice to other. I mean, without doing injustice to other, you cannot do justice to one person. But Platonic justice rejects it. Rejects it. Justice means it is justice for all. Everyone will get the fruit of justice. But sir, today I was teaching students Marxist theory of right. And there I found something interesting, that freedom of speech and expression, freedom of association is with the Communist Party. If one individual is against the Communist Party, then that individual will lose his freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and freedom of association. Now, keeping this view, I mean, if there is any imbalances in Platonic system, then it is the responsibility of the philosopher king to bring balance in the society, to develop morality within the individual. And in Platonic system, there is no Supreme Court. It is all about the philosopher king. Now there is a strong resemblance between Platonic, philosopher king and Communist Party in socialistic system. How are you going to distinguish between these two systems? Communist Party in socialist system and philosopher king in Platonic system.
Plato's theory of state and also his theory of justice, these are moral concepts. These are essentially concerned with a life of virtue, for attainment of a life of virtue, and essentially a moral or good life. And that is also the objective of Marx originally. What you say, so far as the role of the Communist Party is concerned, is not ever conceptualized by Marx in his political thought. Communist Party doesn't exist in Marxian thought. Originally speaking, this is a perversion of Marxism into Leninism, into Stalinism, into Maoism, the later communists. They have borrowed Marxian ideas and they have formulated their own concept of Communist Party. So in Marxian theory, you do not come across the concept of a Communist Party. Rather, Marx wishes every individual to be a moral individual, ultimately. Every individual must be an enlightened individual, he says. Because what is his model of the communist society? For there will be no exploitation. Every individual would be an autonomous individual, completely free individual, a moral individual. There would be complete and perfect fraternity among the people. He is not in favor of state. State would cease to exist. So Marxian model is almost identical with Plato's model, ultimately speaking. Marx finds no other way out to make the individual moral except removing the right to property or possessions. That is what Plato has said. Marx has been tremendously influenced by Plato. He has borrowed Plato's ideas of communism in the sense of abolishing property and providing a scheme of communism of property for his citizens. So the essence of Marxian ideas you can trace to Plato's ideas. So both these thinkers, Plato as well as Marx, they wish for a moral individual so that there would be peace in society, there would be fraternity in society, there would be justice in society. What is the concept of justice? How do we define it? Justice is a synthesis of the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. These three values, when synthesized together, when combined together, results in the establishment of justice or prevalence of justice. Absence or harmonious co-relationship between these three values would make the society unjust. So every individual must have his liberty. Every individual must be treated equally with every other individual, meaning thereby there would be no exploitation of individual. There will be no violence. This is also the Gandhian concept. All these are great philosophers, great thinkers. The aim is one, but they give different models. The aim is to make the individual moral. The aim is to establish the social harmony and fraternity, brotherhood, peace, stability, to ensure the liberty of the individual, to ensure equality among the individuals. Unless there is liberty and equality, there can never be fraternity among the people. So these three values must be combined together. There must be synthesized liberty, equality, and fraternity, and that is what we mean by justice. So all these thinkers, their aim is one and the same, but they take different paths, different models to realize that end. So I do not find any difference between the fundamentals of Platonic ideas and the fundamentals of Marxian ideas or the fundamentals of Gandhian ideas. They are interrelated. Yes, I'm not able to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I agree with you that Marxists, they have gone beyond Marx idea.
Yes, they
But
perverted
if you
Marxism.
but can we compare Communist Party with Philosopher King?
No, Communist Party rules selfishly, but philosopher Kim is a man of highest reason. He rules on the basis of reason, not on the basis of appetite. Communist
Sir,
Party
it is
rules on
the
the basis of appetite, not on the
no, it
basis
is
of reason.
sir, it is the Karl Marx himself who has said
Mm.
it that the consciousness of the proletariat class, it will be represented by the Communist Party
No,
because
never, never, never. There is no concept of Communist Party in original Marxian ideas. It is a later development. It is a perversion. Perversion by the Russian communists. It is Lenin who first invented the concept of Communist Party. borrowed Marxian ideas and tried to implement Marxian ideas through formation of a communist party. So Marx is never in favor of a communist party. He says
So for
communist manifesto, not communist party.
him, I think what Kalmas is saying, for him, the proletariat class
Yes,
will have their own consciousness,
yes,
and they are capable person to fight against the bourgeois state.
yes. But the
Okay,
the dictators of the proletariat is not the final, the culmination of the evolution of the society.
I agree.
Society would
And just
stop
to
evolving. It would be complete in evolution provided there is establishment of the communist society, not a communist state.
classless,
The concept of
classless
communist state is not found in Marxian philosophy or thought.
dictatorship of the proletariat, it will be for a
Yes,
temporary period
it
to
will
face
lead
the
to,
counter revolution.
yes, dictatorship of the proletariat would facilitate the establishment of the communist society. But when it will come, Marx is also not sure. That is a vision, and therefore Marx is also called as a visionary. He is an
And
utopian.
this question, I think we should not ask if the philosopher king fails to, provide moral virtue in the state and society, what will happen? This is a relevant question because
Yes,
he is the man of
man of
highest
reason.
virtue.
Yes, he
So
rules on the basis of reason. He never
whatever he
rules on the
will,
basis of appetite. Yes,
whatever he will do, that is right.
yes.
It only requires time for the man of spirit and appetite to understand it. So they should not doubt the philosopher king, since it is a very much idealistic kind of model. Since the very purpose is morality, such type of question, I think we should avoid you know asking such type of question. Okay, let me go
You,
back to the
if
yes, sir.
you may reject the fundamental assumptions of Plato, but once you accept, it's very difficult for you. It is impossible for you to reject him.
Now, actually, rejecting any ideal becomes very difficult. Rejecting reality, it is easy than rejecting
You may
ideal.
criticize that this is not practical, not possible, it is unpragmatic, unrealistic. You may criticize like that. You may question the fundamental assumptions.
Now, I think the reference point of reality is always ideal.
Yes,
See, if
certainly.
there is no ideal, then I mean, the reality will refer to what?
Certainly.
So, even law, what we call, a real law means a reality. The
Yes.
reference point of law is the morality.
Yes,
And
certainly.
morality is all about, your own imagination, highest imagination. So, you imagine, then you make a law. So, uh, just before the law, it is all about morality, and morality is all about the human imagination. Okay, let me go back to the questions asked by the students. The first question is thus: what is the relationship between individual justice and societal justice according to Plato?
Yes. What is? Could you
Difference
repeat the question?
between
Yes.
difference difference between individual justice and societal justice.
What is the difference? Are you listening to the lectures attentively? That is my first question to you. Have you listened to the discussions or you are absent in the discussions?
Sir,
Jitendra,
relationship between. Sir, relationship between.
Ah, what is the
uh,
relationship between individual concept of justice, respect of justice is the foundational concept for the social concept of justice. Unless the individual is justice at the level of the society or state can never be established. This is the relationship. One is the foundation, another is the superstructure.
I'm sorry that he has written relationship. I asked differences. Relationship is all about half difference and half similarities, and the individual justice and societal justice. Societal justice is the superstructure, and
Yes,
individual justice is the
it is the
base.
foundation.
It is all
Foundation.
about it is all about that I should not cheat myself if I am a
Yes,
man of reason. I should not
certainly.
cheat myself that I am the man of spirit or appetite. Right.
Yes,
So I should not intervene in my natural. I mean, the qualities nature has
If,
gifted me, I must not intervene in
if
that.
I become good, my class would become good. That is the concept. That's the relationship. Because the class is composed of individuals. So individual must be good. Then only the class would be good. Individual must be just. Then only the class will be just. And there will be justice in the state. This is the relationship.
It is very much integrally connected. One is based on the other.
Uh,
Okay, next question is asked. Sir, you said that Plato critiqued the existing theory of justice through the mouth of Socrates, which has been taken as an imaginary body. Then,
yes.
sir, supporter of Sophist school of justice themselves did not define anything regarding justice in
Yes, they
front
have
of
defined
Socrates.
it. They have defined it in accordance with the legal perspective. Justice is legal. Obedience to the ruler is justice. Obedience to the terms and conditions of the social contract is justice. Obedience to the laws of the state, these are justice. So a legal concept of justice is propagated by the then sophistic teachers. And Plato says this is false concept. Justice is
I,
never legal. Justice is moral. Justice is never behavioral. It is internal. It is a psychic. It resides in the mind of the individual, the soul of the individual. Then only gets reflected in individual behavior and activities. So
see, in
justice is
that,
internal. Where justice resides, it resides in the soul of the individual. What is the seat of justice? Where is the location of justice? Justice is in the mind of the individual, soul of the individual. That is
see,
what Plato.
in that dialogue, only the imaginary figure was Socrates. Otherwise, Plato is directly attacking to the Sophist school of justice.
Yes,
Plato is
directly.
saying this is your school of justice and this is my idea of justice, and my idea of justice is represented by the imaginary Socrates.
Yes,
So the all the statements in the relating to justice or dialogues relating to justice are not imaginary except the figure Socrates. That
figures.
figure
Yes,
is imaginary.
yes,
Otherwise, everything was reality. One was the reality prevailing in that situation, and another was a reality that is in the imagination of
yes, Plato.
Plato. Plato
Yes,
was
yes.
thinking, this
Mm.
is what? Then what is right? Right is not always that something is prevailing, that's why it is right. Sometimes, your imagination may be right, prevailing things are maybe wrong. Okay. The next question, what do you mean by objective of goodness and
I have rep-
subjective of goodness?
I have repeatedly explained it in earlier classes. Probably this student was absent. That is why I insist on attentive listening to the discussions. If you remain absent, you will miss the class. You will miss the understanding. Objective goodness is different from subjective goodness. Subjective goodness is that goodness which pertains to your physical body. If you take food, you feel very happy. If you take mutton, you feel very happy. That is your subjective goodness. If you take a ice cream, you feel very joy. That is your subjective goodness. If you wear very good clothes, live in good houses, drive a car, visit parties, the type of pleasure or enjoyment that you get is subjective goodness. It is temporary. How long your joy or happiness would continue if you take a very good meal? How long? It will change after 1 hour. So anything that changes, anything which pertains to this physical body is a subjective goodness.
Acha, if you apply Rousseau, objective goodness is your real will and subjective goodness is your actual will.
Yes, yes. That Rousseau has borrowed these concepts from Plato. This is the glory of Plato.
Plato
Marx
has
has
been
borrowed.
referred by.
Yes, Rousseau has borrowed it. Marx has borrowed it. Almost every thinker, they have been influenced, tremendously influenced by Plato.
And what about Socrates? No, sorry, what about Aristotle?
He has also been. because
He has borrowed it.
he is a very affectionate student of Plato.
Okay, so I think this much questions are there. Students, if you want to directly ask your question to sir, you can. I cannot see other questions in the chat box. Sir, if one will revisit your earlier talk except this, one may get the Platonic, justice.
Yes.
My question is that what is the most unique aspect of today's lecture? What is the most unique aspect of today's lecture?
Nothing. All these are interrelated, seeing the same thing in different perspective.
And I urge,
All these emanate from his concept of human nature. That is why I tell that concept of human nature is the foundational concept.
okay,
These are
and
the derivative concepts. Yes.
I urge my students to write articles in their own way. They prepare it,
Yes.
that how, I mean, what lesson the modern day justice learn from Platonic justice. What lessons the modern day's justice learn from the Platonic justice. This is the question I'm throwing at you. I want you to think and rethink about the answer of this question. You go through your books, articles, and you try to write down something so that we will help you in editing part, and the best write-up we will send for the publication. So with this, I am ending this event today. But before it, let me take a confirmation that on the next Monday, sir, are you going to conclude Plato?
No, no. You see, um, I have already discussed the major concepts of Plato's political thought relating to
Agree?
his concept of state and state individual relationship. I've covered all his concepts.
Yes.
Of course, briefly. Of course, in view of the students to appear in the examinations or to appear in an interview, I hope they would get clarity in explaining Plato's concepts. So this is the last class on Plato, Plato's concepts, Plato's political thought. I urge
Okay.
upon the students, I urge upon the listeners to come prepared in my next class to have a critical estimation or evaluation of Plato. Because they have listened to the discussions till date, till today. If they
Okay,
have
I
not,
think I
they
got it.
must,
I got it.
they, yes,
In the last class, you will not speak. You are
yes, I
there.
will listen. I will listen. The
You
students
you
will
will
speak.
you will
They will
listen, and
criticize.
at the same time, you will also clarify
Yes.
the doubts relating to the questions and answers.
Till date, they have raised several questions on Plato's concepts. But what I found, their questions were not questions in the true form on Plato's concepts. They were questions garbed in their personal judgment or opinions or evaluations on Plato's concept. So
Okay,
let them
fair
come
enough.
prepared. Yes, let them come prepared. Read
Uh,
these discussions or listen to the discussions, earlier discussions, and let them engage themselves in a critical analysis of Plato's concept. And then we shall conclude next class. And I shall take the next class on coming Friday, not Monday. Coming Friday on 17th.
Write down 17. It's okay, no
Yes,
problem,
yes,
because you have work on Monday. I got
yes.
it. So on coming,
From coming Saturday onwards, I will be extremely busy. I have no time because my youngest son is coming to this place from Michigan, and we shall
okay,
have a family get together for about 7 days. So I have no time. I shall have to spend my time with my grandchildren.
fair
They
enough,
will
fair
not
enough.
they will not leave me even for half an hour. That's the problem.
Okay. So on coming Friday, I will initiate the critical estimation of Platonic
Oh,
thought,
yes, yes,
and it
yes,
will be followed by the questions and questions raised by the student,
yes,
and then sir will intervene, and it will be just like we are just having a kind of engagement with
yes.
your critical estimation.
It will be in the form of a dialogue, Platonic dialogue.
It's a dialogue. So sir will not or sir will not have any monologue. So it
Yes,
will
no
be,
monologue.
it's not dialogue, it's actually multilogue,
Yes,
right?
multilogue. Yes,
Or multilogue. So with this, I am ending today's event, and on behalf of on behalf of the student, I am thankful to sir for his time, for his energy, and for his you know thought provoking thoughts. Sir is not giving thought provoking, it's actually Plato.
Plato is
Sir is
giving.
representing Plato. So
I do
plato
not have
plato
any
is,
originality.
that is true.
I
So
do not have any originality. I'm
Plat
merely explaining what Plato says.
exactly. So Plato is provoking us. Plato is provoking us.
Yes.
So thank you one and all.
So students and listeners are required to be provoked and stimulated to make a critical estimate of Plato's concepts, from his concept of human nature, ending with his concept of justice. All these
That is the
concepts.
whole,
Yes, yes.
purpose of a teacher and lecture in a classroom. Right. So we are there to stimulate you, and our stimulation will increase your interest, and
Yes.
your interests are the purpose. So I'm stopping, sir. Be there.
Oh, yes. Yes.